All right, recording, that will get posted eventually. Today's unit's on checkboxes. So we're sort of finishing up sort of basic interfacing. And checkboxes are for, you give the user several choices and they are allowed to choose more than one. So previously we did radio buttons where you gave them several choices and they can pick one. Now they can pick more than. Okay. But are there any questions before I start going over new examples? All right. So as we've done before, I'll sort of give you a couple of versions, sort of a baseline, you better know this version, a sort of a more sophisticated version, and then sort of a dynamic generated on the page encode version. Okay. All right, so I downloaded it, so it's in downloads, and here's my Visual Studio Code. In my Visual Studio Code, I've opened the folder to downloads. And so here in my Explorer, there is my extracted zipped file. There's the CSS, then there is the code. And okay, and I have in the extensions, I have the live server installed. Okay, so I can in my HTML right click and open with a live server. And that opened up in Edge. And here we go. So we have some movies, a set of movies, top movies, when somebody had on a list at some stage, and then the users picking out, I don't know, which ones they want to see or which ones they have seen or who knows, but something. Okay, so which ones have I seen? Schindler's List, Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, Citizen Kane, and The Wizard of Oz. Okay. And then, so that's a set of radio buttons. So like the set of radio buttons, the set of checkboxes are grouped together based on their name, as we will see when we look at the code. Whereas down here, this one that says, I agree to all conditions, that's like a one-off checkbox. So sometimes you deal with a checkbox as a singleton, as a single lone checkbox, and sometimes you deal with them as a group. So if I don't agree to all the conditions, if I don't agree to this one checkbox here, then I just get a message, you must agree. But if I check, then it's giving me my list of Schindler's List, Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, Citizen Kane, Wizard of Oz, the ones I've chosen. And it threw them down here into what's called an ordered list. And if I change any of them, I have some clearing code. And so it cleared it out. If I changed either checked or unchecked any of the check boxes. Okay. So I have some CSS, and it's pretty much the same kind of CSS I had before, except it's the type. The type is now checkbox rather than radio. But mostly it's the same sort of style I had before. And I made it an external style sheet. And so here over in the HTML, there's my link to that external style sheet. Okay. Now, what do I have? Here's a message about that I have a weird name. So we still use a name to group things. So a name, again, I said this the last time, if you have an attribute of a name in HTML, it's got two purposes. One is if you're going to interact with the server, then it is the name attribute which is how you send information up to a server. So even if you were just sending like an individual, somebody's first name, using a text box, if you wanted to send that information to a server, you would use the attribute name. Whereas if we're just doing client stuff, just worried about what's on, doing all the code on the computer in front of you, then you use an ID. But the second purpose of a name is to group things. So we will use the name to group those checkboxes that have a similar role, that they all have names of movies in them. Now the name, so I'm using the name to group the movie checkboxes together, but I've given it this weird name with square brackets. And that's me thinking about the possibility that there might be the second use of the name attribute, which is to send it to a server. So the whole reason for checkboxes is that I can check more than one, so that the answer, when you say which checkboxes are checked, the answer is an array. There can be more than one. And so if you're going to send it up to send the information up to a server using the name, these square brackets are letting the code world know what you're going to be sending up is an array. For us, it's just a name. For us, it's just a weird name. We're doing client stuff. But if we were doing server stuff, that square bracket there would serve the purpose of saying what we're sending up to the server is an array. Okay. So here is the one checkbox, the first checkbox for the Godfather. It's an input. I gave it an ID. I gave it a name. All the names are going, the names of all the checkbox of all the movie checkboxes are going to be the same. They're the type checkbox. The value is the thing that gets set behind the scenes. Now, sometimes, like in the last lab and in today's lab, I will give you a head start on the page because it's a little bit of a complicated page and I don't want you to spend all your time designing. But there's important HTML work to be done when you have radio buttons and when you have checkboxes, and I'm not going to do it all for you. So I may give something a name, but I may not give it a name, or I may give it more things the same name than should have the same name. So you have to watch out for my tricks. The value is something useful to you to work with behind the scenes. And I sometimes give you no value or a fake value. So another thing to watch out for. Okay. But anyway, so we have an input. It's of the checkbox type. It's got an ID. It's got a name. It's got a value. We have a clearing event that if they click on the checkbox, we're going to clear out any movies they might have had. And then after the input, there is a label. So the checkbox is just that little white square. If we want to see what the user's actually checking, then we need something else. I'm putting that in a label. The 4 of the label matches the ID of the input. That allows them to work as a team. So that means that when I click on the label, it's the same as if I'm clicking on the checkbox. It also helps screen readers know that those two things are working as a team. So that is my checkbox, and then I just have a bunch of them, different IDs, same name, different values. Okay, so those are just all my movies. I gave the IDs, check movie 1, check movie 2. I am not going to loop through those checkboxes based on their ID. I'm going to loop through them based on their name. But because I named them systematically checkbox 1, checkbox 2, I could use that as a way of looping over them. Then here's my single checkbox. Do you agree to the conditions? So here's the label, here's the checkbox. I gave it a name, but I didn't have to because the main purpose of the name for us is to group it, and this guy is by himself. So he's in a group by himself. Okay. Here is the button. Here is the place for me to display my answer. Here's my script. I'm enabling the button in case it was disabled at any time. I am looping through the check boxes. So when I say get elements by name, and then the name, check movie, square, open and close square bracket, that gets me an array, and the array has a length. So I'm looping over the indices of my array, and I am unchecking my checkboxes. So again, if for any reason my checkboxes got checked and I refresh my page, this code will get run and uncheck all the checkboxes. Here's the button when they click the button. This is that first checkbox. I'm working with the, sorry, not the first checkbox, the last checkbox. The last checkbox, the lone checkbox, is about the conditions. Since it works alone, I'm getting it by ID. If I used by name, then it would say that's an array because you're getting it by name, and then I'd have to have square bracket 0. But I'm getting it by its ID because it's a lone checkbox. And so I'm asking if it's checked, or here, actually, sorry, here I have the exclamation point for the inverse operator. So I'm asking if it's not checked, I'm going to yell and get out. Okay. But that's just how you work with a lone. So if a checkbox is working by itself, then you can work with its ID. If you are working with a checkbox as a group, then you work with it by name. The answer is an array. The checked movies, the movies I saw, are an array. I've seen more than one movie. So here is me declaring an array of the movies that I have watched. Here I am looping over the checkboxes. Okay, we've seen that array before. I'm asking if the checkbox is checked. And if it is, I am grabbing its value, which was the name of the movie, and I am pushing it onto my array. So I'm going to have an array of the movies that the user checked. Outside of the loop, if you want to know if somebody did something in a loop, you got to wait till the loop is done. So after the loop is done, then I ask, this user input was an array. I ask if its length is 0. If its length is 0, then the person didn't choose any movies. So I'm just going to say you didn't choose any movies. Maybe they don't like movies. Otherwise, I'm going to show them the movies that they displayed in an alert over here in the console. And I'm also going to put it on the page. And here is, remember that you selected the following. This is the length of the movies, so I know how many movies I chose. Where am I at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You selected 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't count. This wasn't a movie. And there, so I know the count of the movies because I have my answer is an array, and the array has a length, so I know how many movies there are. And I'll do things like I think like I have some salad example. Maybe that's this week, and you have to pay 50 cents a topping. Well, then if you know the length of the topping array, then you can multiply that by 0.5 and get charged 50 cents per topic. Okay, and here is the start of an ordered list. Here is LI, the beginning of a list item in the list, and then between all of the array elements, I'm ending the list element, the previous list element, and starting a new list element. And then when I'm all done, I'm adding the close list element and the close ordered list. And that's what produced this ordered list down here. This is if they if they click on any of the checkboxes, I'm clearing out my answer and I'm enabling the button and I'm doing something into the console. Okay, so that is the example one, the sort of baseline checkbox example. The HTML looks an awful lot like the radio buttons, in that the group of checkboxes, you give them a name, you loop over the name, you ask if they're checked, but you have to understand the basic difference in the functionality of checkboxes and radio buttons is that checkboxes allow the user to check more than one. Therefore, your answer is going to be an array rather than just a single value. Okay. Questions? No. All right. So now we will go up to version 2, where we're going to add the listener. So not have on clicks, but have on listener, add listeners of the click type. Okay, and this time I separated the style and the JavaScript. I want to see, let me see my file extension. So I'm going to go to Control Panel. I'm going to move out of category into icons. I'm going to go to File Explorer, Options. I'm going to go to the View. I want to uncheck hide extensions. I want to see those extensions. And so I have a CSS, I have a JS, and I have an HTML. Again, if you're going to send me something where you have a JS, you can't send me bare files in an email. You must zip it up because a .js won't survive you sending me an email. Okay, so there it is in downloads. I extracted it, I downloaded it, I extracted it. This was pointing, here's the add listener version. The style is still pretty much the same. Here's the checkbox, the HTML. What's changed in the HTML? The checkboxes don't call a check event, don't call a click event. That's going to be done in code. The button does not call a click event. I got rid of the lone checkbox. Just wanted to show that to you once, but so there's no on click here, either on the checkboxes or on the button. And I put my code into a separate JS file. Just moving towards a more sophisticated style. And then here's the check.js. Here is me adding the click event for the button. Add event listener click, handle button. Then I must define handle button. Here's me accessing all the array of checkboxes. They had the name check, movie, open close bracket, square bracket. And then I'm looping over that array and adding to them a click event. This is me enabling the button so that the user can click it. This is me looping over the checkboxes so that they are not checked. So I had that loop twice. I could have combined those I could have combined this loop and this loop, but it just allows me to show you two different loop styles as well. Here I used the for each style, and here I used the more old-fashioned count over an index. Here's the button, here's the answer, which is an empty array. I am using the query selector all. With radio buttons, we could use the query selector, because the query selector in the radio buttons, we were looking for the thing that was checked, and there was one of them. With checkboxes, there are going to be multiple checked things. So we can't do query selector, we do query selector all. We're announcing that we're expecting an array. This is going to give me the array of checked boxes. So here's the query that I'm selecting. Input, name, check movie, square bracket, colon checked. So these are the checked checkboxes belonging to that group. And now I'm looping over them and adding the value to my input. I don't in my loop ask if the checkbox is checked, because this loop is only over the checked checkboxes. So I've already asked up here if they're checked. I've only gotten the ones that are checked. If they didn't choose any, I just alert that fact, and otherwise this is the same as before. Except now I'm using, I'm not doing the ordered list now. I'm just putting them on the page with a break tag between them. So let me choose some movies. You must agree to the conditions. This is the wrong one. Okay. Where am I? Oh, I'm trying to open the JS. I need to open the, sorry, wrong thing. That was the JS, but what I run with the live server is the HTML. There we are, sorry. And pick some movies. And I got rid of the numbers down here, so. Okay. So here I just was using breaks, not LIs, and here's the clear. Questions about version 2? He says no, he understands it completely. Okay, good. All right, so that was version 1. Version 2, version 3 is I'm just going to have a place on the page to load up checkboxes dynamically. So of what we're doing today, this will be the most sophisticated. So there it is, dynamic. Should be here. There it is. The CSS is nothing different. The HTML, there are no checkboxes. There's just a div that will hold checkboxes. I did make a button. I did make a div for displaying the answer. I have a script tag connecting me to my JavaScript. Okay. And I have an array of movies. I tell my code, here's where I'm going to put things. So I called it the target, and it's a div, it's a container. I'm looping over my movies using a for each. L is the element of the array, is the name of a movie. So the first time round, it's The Godfather. Then the second time round, it's The Shawshank Redemption, and so on. And the I is an index. So first time it's 0, the next time it's 1. Then here I'm using what's called the fat arrow notation, and I'm creating a method to handle the iteration. I'm making a new input of the checkbox type. I'm making its value an I. When I work with arrays, I find that the most useful value is the index of the array. I'm giving all of the checkboxes the same name, so they'll work as a group. I'm giving them an ID, which has to be unique. So I'm saying CHK plus the element, but I could have also said CHK plus I. I'm giving it an on-click event. I'm adding it to the page. I'm creating the label. I'm giving it a for attribute, which should match the ID attribute of the input. I add a text node with the name of the movie. So that's what the user sees on the page. I add the node to the label, and then I add the label to the div. And it's added, it's appending, and append always adds at the end. So this label is added right after the checkbox that I just made. And then the third thing is I'm adding a break tag, and I add that to the page. I'm giving myself the button, the click event. I'm enabling the click button. I am enabling all of the, or unchecking, sorry, all of the checkboxes. Here's me handling the button. Here's my empty array. I'm using the query selector again, so I'm finding the checked checkboxes. I'm looping over the checkboxes. I'm adding what the value now is the index. So I'm using my array at that index and pushing it on to my list of movies that the user chose. If they didn't choose any movies, if the length of that array is 0, I just alert that. Otherwise, I put them on the page. Here's my clearing code again. So that is the version, the dynamic version. So you see the create element, the append child, and so on. Questions on that one? I don't expect you to be using this one just yet. It's going to come back later when we do React. Besides, I gave you a head start, and I gave you a head start with checkboxes and radio buttons already on the page. But you can decide you don't want to use them, clear out those boxes and work dynamically. I won't prevent you from working dynamically, but you don't have to at this stage. I'm expecting you to work at either level 1 or level 2 right now. All right, what else am I supposed to be showing you today? I'll let you, if I show you a grid, no, you can. I have been making things that sometimes when I give you the code, it's been a grid layout. So if you want to start learning about making your own grids, you can look at this. This is just HTML and CSS, but there's no JavaScript here. Let me show you this radio button thing. That is a thing that often comes up. I often want 2 pieces of information. And with one element or one set of elements. And so this is radio, 2 pieces of data. So there's some style, not much. And then here is the HTML with the JavaScript in it. And I just have the same code 3 times. I'm just showing you 3 ways to do it. I want to know how many scoops of ice cream they chose, and I want to know the price. So that's 2 pieces of information. In version 1, I choose 2 scoops, and I know it's 2 scoops, and that's $3.50. Down here, just doing it a different way, I know that it's 3 scoops, and I know that that's $4.50. And down here, another way of doing it, it's 1 scoop, it's $2.50. So I'm always getting 2 pieces of information. All right. In version 1, I have the input with a value, which is the price, followed by a label, which has the words. And then I have my usual, here's my order, that is the button calls this function. And here I am looping over the radio buttons and asking which one's checked. So I'm not doing any query selector fancy stuff. I'm just doing the basic old loop over the look over the radio buttons in this case. And I'm getting the value of the radio button. That was the price. And then I'm using this trick of the next element sibling to grab the words. So the label was right after the input. So here's the input, here's the label, and if one follows the other, then I can say that it's the next element sibling. So that was my first way of getting the 2 pieces of data. Another way, we use this for property. The radio button had an ID, and the label had a 4, and that allowed them to work together. Another way to get a label and a radio button to work together is to put the radio button inside the label. So a label has an open and a close. And another way to get these 2 to work as a team is to put this radio button inside the label. If you do that, they work together, and so they work together just fine, but you lose this ability to do the next sibling thing. So this requires, if you're going to take this approach, it requires that the label be the next sibling. And this code will give you an error if there is no next sibling, or if the next sibling doesn't have inner HTML or anything like that. Okay. So that was version 1, the sibling approach. I had a radio button. After the radio button closed, then I started a label. So the label was the next sibling, and there's JavaScript for that. Version 2. In version 2, I use a split. So now my value, the value of a radio button is not what the user sees, but what we get in JavaScript behind the scenes. So behind the scenes, I'm getting 1 scoop vertical bar 250, or 2 scoops vertical bar 350. Okay. So here I'm same things before, loop over the radio buttons, ask which one's checked, get the value. And I call that data. And then the data has 2 parts. The data has the word and the price separated by a vertical bar. So then I took my data and I split it on the vertical bar, and that gave me tokens. And the first tokens, the 0th tokens, token 0, that was the words. And then tokens 1 was the price. So that's just another way to get 2 pieces of data. Third approach to get 2 pieces of data. This time I changed the value to 0, 1, 2. I'm going to work with the values as the index of an array. And actually, I'm going to use it as the index of two parallel arrays. So I have an array of the words, and I have an array of the prices. Play the same game, loop over the array of radio buttons, figure out which one's checked, grab its value. But this time the value is an index. And if I want to show you how many scoops, I use that index in my scoops array. And if I want to show you the price, I use that index in my price array. So 3 ways to get 2 pieces of information out of the one radio button. And I may have a scenario where you have to get 2 pieces of information, but I probably won't say you must use this approach or that approach. We will get, after we do objects, we will be a little more sophisticated here in this array approach, in that we won't have parallel arrays. We'll have an array of objects, and those objects will have multiple properties. Any questions? All right, so I'll stop the recording.